As we continue to look through Revelation 20 and where we read about the millennial kingdom, what we've seen is that over the last few centuries there's been a few different interpretations of this passage that have come into the Christian church. The first one being amillennialism, that the 1,000 years is symbolic and is actually happening now within the church age. And postmillennialism, which is that the 1,000 years is again symbolic, but will happen after the church age, where the church has transformed society and will just flow into the millennial kingdom, and that the resurrection and rapture and judgment and moving into eternity all happens at that point after that. These are two newer interpretations of this passage, and the classic view that has been held through much of church history about this passage is what we might call premillennialism. And this is the idea that Jesus will return before the millennium kingdom, and basically has it that we're now living in the church age, but there will come a point where we see the end times begin. And we have the rapture, the resurrection of believers, and the tribulation. And this view allows for all three of the possible understandings of that to be possible. Because it's only after all of that, after the tribulation and after the raptures, that we see the millennial kingdom coming to be, where Jesus reigns for 1,000 years on earth. And after that, we then see the resurrection of the unbelievers, the judgment of the unbelievers, and the beginning of the new heavens and the new earth and eternity. As I said, this is the classical view that the church has held throughout church history. And it believes that the church age will continue up until the tribulation. It believes that the church will be raptured, and as I said, it allows for all three possibilities that we've discussed. And it believes that at the end of the tribulation, Jesus will return, and that this will be the second coming of Jesus, where he touches down on the Mount of Olives, and that believers will reign with Jesus for 1,000 years. Jesus will physically be present in a bodily form, and believers will receive their resurrection bodies. Unbelievers who survive the tribulation will still be on earth and are still able to repent through the millennial kingdom. And throughout this time of the millennial kingdom, Satan is bound and unable to influence or deceive the world. As you can probably see, this understanding of Revelation 20 allows for a literal translation of interpretation of Revelation 6 to Revelation 21. And also recognises that there are several of the Old Testament passages, so for example Zechariah 14 verses 6 to 21, that talk about Jesus' return. What we read in those passages, they struggle for many people, they struggle to fit with either of the other two views and fit with the classic understanding of how the millennium fits. It also looks at other New Testament passages that speak of believers ruling the nations. So for example, Revelation 2 verses 26 to 27. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul, when he's talking, he talks about believers receiving new bodies, and then comes the end. And he talks about this being the order of things. And if we understand that understanding and interpretation of the Bible, then it would support this view. It also identifies that the binding of Satan implies a greater restriction than what we know now. So the views that Satan is currently bound and his influence has decreased, I think some of us would struggle to see that in the world that we live in today, where sin and evil seems to be multiplying. It's very hard to consider that Satan's currently bound. But for the millennial kingdom, there's clearly something different that happens where Satan is bound to stop that deception of the nations. In Revelation 20 verse 4, it also talks about the coming to life. And everywhere else in the Bible where it talks about coming to life, it's actually talking about resurrection. It's the same verb that we see in Revelation 2 verse 8 that Jesus uses. And the New Testament frequently refers to believers reigning in the future. You know, when Revelation 20 verse 4, and it refers to the beast, it's also then talking about what will happen in the future. So therefore, it would seem fair to assume that this passage is referring to the future. We have three different understandings that have come in about how this passage fits. And you may have heard people talk about arguments within Christian circles of amillennial, premillennial, postmillennial. I've said that I'll always let the Bible speak for itself. And as I present these things to you today, I think the key message is this. The Bible makes clear that there is a point where Jesus returns, the second coming, and Revelation 20 says that when he comes, then there will be this rule of Jesus with his believers, with his church here on earth.